What's shaking, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Orange Bloods Texas Football YouTube channel. I'm Geoff Ketchum, joined as always by Anwar Richardson. It's a Monday. It was a big weekend on the 40 acres. It was a big sports weekend in general. So it's a perfect time for us to do our Overreaction Monday podcast/show. If you like the video, hit the like button. If you want to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe button. We're going to be talking a lot about Keilan Johnson here in the show today. Robinson. I'm going to mess up. Williams is what I want to call him. And I just got to think Bijan over and over and over again. But we're going to be talking a lot today about new Texas running back Keilan Robinson. Go check out the video on the channel that Alex Dunlap did where he watched video of Keilan Robinson and then kind of reacted to it in live. Like, I don't know that he had watched video of Keilan at all until he started to watch the video as he was recording, and he likes him. And Anwar, as we get started today talking about Keilan Robinson, I've got a reaction. I just don't know if it's an overreaction. So my question to you is, on an Overreaction Monday show, do you want to lead off with an overreaction, or do you want to hear my reaction and then deem it worthy or not worthy of an overreaction?
I'll give you an overreaction.
Okay.
The overreaction is every running back who is not named Bijan Robinson on this Texas roster should be worried. I think every running back, I'm talking your Roschon Johnsons, I'm talking about your Gabe Watsons, I'm talking about Jonathan Brooks, I'm talking about Daniel Young. I'm talking about everybody should be worried, because when this guy comes in, when Keilan comes in, everybody gets moved down a notch on that pecking order. And so what my overreaction is, as much as Sarkisian said, and we're starting to realize that he says a lot of the right things, and then you got to go to what he may do. As much as he praised Roschon Johnson in the spring and talked him up, and people sometimes behind the scene even wanted to insinuate that Roschon could potentially, and that was even Sark, kind of could potentially get some more touches and maybe even be in like in a 50-50 split. As much as he said that, as much as he said it was great to have Daniel Young back and the impact that he was having, as much as we saw Gabe Watson in the spring game, and we're like, holy Gabe Watson is alive, people. Like, here he is. Catch what we saw at the end of the day, Sark is like, oh, I got somebody. I got somebody who I think is better than those guys, and I'm going to bring that person in, because I'll say this, and I will continue saying this: when it comes to recruiting transfers are coming into a place because they weren't receiving playing time where they were, and they want to have assurances that if I go here, I'm not quote unquote just competing, right? No one, because he could just compete at Alabama and see what happens. They want to go to a place where they feel like they're going to get significant playing time. And you've got to paint a picture, Catch. You got to paint a picture to a recruit, a guy in the transfer portal, Catch. You have to say, look, these are the guys on the roster, and I think you're better than these guys. And so that's why you should come here. And I think you'll have more of a chance of playing time here than anywhere else. So that's why I say, for my overreaction, everybody who isn't named Bijan Robinson should be a little concerned.
I don't know if it's an overreaction. It might just be a reaction, because I think a lot of what you said is absolutely true, which, if that's the case, it can't be by definition an overreaction. I think one of the real interesting things about this situation is I can look at his profile, and it's a perfect fit for what this Texas offense needs at the running back position. He is one of these versatile little water bugs, June bug types that, throw him a swing pass. He's 5'9". How big he is now. He was 190 when he first got to Alabama. Now I've heard people even rumbling that he could be up to as much as 220 pounds. I don't know if I want that kid that big, But he's a guy that ran a 4.34 at a summer camp for Penn State back in high school. And everybody at Alabama kind of viewed him as their home run hitter among the running back group that they had. Not necessarily the best running back that Alabama had, but for a specific niche and role, he was a guy that Alabama fans thought had an absolute future with the school before he put his name into the portal last week. And when you look at this Texas offense, they have nobody like that. So for the same reasons that I think Xavier Worthy shows up as a true freshman and has a chance because of his profile as a player, is so different than everybody else really on the roster. I think this kid kind of falls into that same path. He's just a guy that if you need somebody on 3rd and 8 to come in and pass protect, I think we feel like we know who that's going to be. Like Roschon Johnson, come on in. But if they need a change of pace guy, if something were, God forbid, to happen to Bijan and suddenly you had to run him back by committee I think one of the things about Roschon being your number one back at that point is he doesn't really bring that home run capability. I mean, he is, it's not that he's incapable of getting yardage beyond 4 or 5 yards per carry, but I don't think of him as a score from anywhere on the field type of player. This kid has that type of explosiveness. And I think here's what I guess maybe be my overreaction.
Okay.
I think as much as any transfer that Texas will be bringing in right now in the 2021 season, I can see his role on this team definitively. Like I can see it. It's easy to close your eyes and imagine where he fits into this roster right now. And, we've argued and debated some of these transfers of just how good they are and what exactly are they going to do and where are they going to play. I don't really do that with this kid. And I think that in my mind, if you close your eyes and combined him and Roschon Johnson together, you would have a complete running back worthy of challenging a Bijan, but you don't. You've got kind of these half players. But in terms of a running back group, he fills an absolute void. And I think the Texas football program is better today. The 2021 team is better today than it was going into the weekend, because I do think that the running back position, whether it was the biggest need in the program or not, it has elevated itself up a notch. And that's a win for Steve Sarkisian as he's looking to make improvements through the portal in this program. Quite frankly, I think that I can see the team being better immediately with the presence of this kid, maybe more so than a guy like a Caleb Evans who visited on June 1st and was offered by Georgia over the weekend, is looking at Missouri, obviously, what we've reported over the course of the last week. But when you look at this Texas team, I don't know that a Caleb Evans jumps in and is an immediate starter, and I don't exactly know what his role would be this year. I feel like with Keilan Robinson, we do know that. And I think that that's a good thing for this team. Like I've been a little slow to be excited about a number of the guys that Texas has landed in the portal. This guy's exciting.
Yeah, I don't think you'll do too many crazy bets as far as a clown wig and a nose for this guy, because ultimately, it's really about. I'm looking up something, and I'm going to see if hopefully if I can find it. But one of the things that. Oh, here it is. I think he talked about Sarkisian when I was at the Touchdown Club in Houston. He talked about the need for explosive plays, right? And that was something that he thought was like really, really important. And he talked about committing to the run, and then you can do a play action pass, right, to create explosive plays. And then he said, now you have more opportunities to score. He goes, it's hard to score on a 10, 12, 14 play drives. It's a lot easier to score on a 5, 6, 7, 8 play drives. So when we try to run the ball we're trying to create explosive plays. And so that's clearly his philosophy, Catch. It's not trying to be that methodical 12 play, 7-minute kind of drive. He's understanding that it's easier to score. And what he's saying there, Catch, in layman's term, is we want to catch the defense off balance. Like, we want to do a couple of little things, like he's saying, play action, do a couple of little things, throw a couple of wrinkles in there so we catch the defense off balance. And the thing that Keilan really offers is that big play explosiveness, to your point, right? Bijan's got some explosiveness. Like, we've seen that within a few games last year. But, Roschon, he's consistent, right? He's going to be the guy that's going to pound you. He's going to, what is your saying about someone giving you 5 yards? If such and such gives you 5, you always have that saying. What is it?
I usually use it in a variety of joking manners, but it usually goes something along the lines of, if it's 3rd and 3 and you need 3 yards, he'll get you 3 yards. And if it's 3rd and 15, he'll get you 3 yards.
Yeah. So I'll give Roschon 4, maybe, yards or something like that. I have to say how many yards per carry he had last year. But you understand that he's just going to be a good, solid, running back for you. I thought he's done, a really good job. Gabe Watson, we don't know what we have, with him. Jonathan Brooks is a young guy. Daniel Young, I think he's just, he's a contributor, and a good locker room guy. So when you start talking about explosive plays and the need to have like explosive plays and explosive players, that's what they had at Alabama. Like, that's what makes them so dynamic. And he's able to say, like, all right, I got some guys that get me down the field, but who's the guy that can make someone miss? That's the great thing about when you looked at, Keilan's film. You saw him make a guy, a lot more in the high school than in the college thing. He opted out because of COVID last year, and didn't play. So, you didn't really have a ton of film on him. But you see explosiveness. You see making a guy miss. You see him making those kind of moves, those juke moves, and then being able to have that speed to take it to the house. So I can see, to your point, Catch, how he makes this offense a lot better. I mean, just a lot better, because it was really catches Bijan and then a bunch of other solid guys. Now you're talking Bijan, you're talking, Keilan, and now all of a sudden, if you're Steve Sarkisian, you have a little bit more toys to play with. And yeah, to your point, it makes the offensive better. It makes everyone better. And the last thing I'll say before I toss it back to you, when you have quarterbacks who don't have that kind of experience that we're talking about, Casey Thompson doesn't have, Hudson Card doesn't have, there's two weapons or two positions that the quarterback has to lean on when they're young or inexperienced, which is running back and tight end. You got to be able to have a good running back that they can rely on. You got to have a tight end where if the things are going too fast for them, to dump it down. And so they definitely at least are solid on the running back position.
Yeah, I was talking to an Alabama insider over the weekend, and this was a guy that when talking about Ben Davis, the Texas linebacker transfer, he said if Ben Davis starts for Texas, he said if Ben Davis starts 6 games for Texas, Texas won't have the season that it needs to have. That he just didn't think that Ben Davis was that type of guy. When I asked him about Keilan Robinson, his answer was completely different. Let me read this to you because it was an interesting set of remarks. He said, Robinson has what Nick Saban refers to as the juice, extremely fast. Decided to opt out last season, and that really hurt him. He was surpassed by other backs. I predict he'll be super successful, just too crowded at Alabama. I looked at one of the Alabama Rivals YouTube channel. Shout out to them. You can go check their stuff out. They've got a video from earlier this spring on Keilan there, right? And Alabama had 7 running backs with Robinson on campus. He was in a pool of 7 guys. And that includes 3 5-star players.
I was going to ask you how many are 5 stars.
And it wasn't necessarily that he wasn't going to play. I think he may have just looked at the room and thought to himself, no, I need to let these dudes battle that out. And I can go somewhere where I've got a lot more of an established long-term role. I mean, when I talk about they were 7 running backs deep, I think 5 of those were either redshirt freshmen or true freshmen. So a young group of guys. Again, he puts his name into the portal and comes to Texas. And the reality is that the position's just not that crowded. And there's nobody like Kamar Wheaton, ironically, the 5-star running back from the state of Texas, who's expected to show up at Alabama this season, although they're still expecting whatever that's going to be to happen. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen with Kamar Wheaton, but there's nobody like that showing up. No offense to Jonathan Brooks. His arrival won't put the fear of God in any running backs on campus. Like, oh my God, the 3-star guy or 4-star guy is here. Like that just, it doesn't quite move the needle for guys on campus or transfers in the way that somebody with a bigger profile would. Like Jatavian Sanders will to the tight end room, right? And I think that this was an easy one for Sarkisian. I mean, they worked with this guy at Alabama. They recruited him.
Yep.
And they could just look at their pool of running backs. The really underrated part of this is that this is a guy that long-term wise might end up being a starting level running back for you. Or at the very least, you're getting at least 2 seasons out of this guy and maybe 3 because he's got 3 seasons of eligibility remaining. So we're not just talking about a 1-year stopgap in the running back room. This is a guy that they're going to be able to build the position around. And when you start to look at this position, and we talk about long-term, because in year 1 of Sarkisian, you and I think both find it hard to believe that this thing ends with a championship. That, you know, on paper, last season should have been the team. If somebody was going to win a championship, you've got a senior at quarterback, you've got, you know, an NFL level left tackle, you've got Joseph Osai, the Big 12 defensive player. You've got pieces of the puzzle that should have added towards a championship run. It didn't happen. They're still trying to figure out their quarterback. They're still trying to put the pieces of a good defense together. The running back room, though, is made for the long haul because you're going to get Bijan. Everybody returns next season. So everything that he gets in this running back room this season will return in a year from now. And on paper, you're adding Jaden Blue to the mix, as well as potential another running back in this class. And suddenly, in 12 months' time, Texas can probably argue that they've got a running back room similar to Alabama. And what Keilan Robinson gets in coming in now is the ability, I think, to carve out that niche before it gets before you're like at Alabama, and carving out your niche is really hard. I think he's arriving just in time to carve out a niche before in 12 to 24 months, it gets really hard to do such a thing.
Yeah, you know, there's 2 things I was thinking about. The first thing is, you know, as we talked about, you know, with Ben Davis and stuff, but I can definitely apply it to this situation. Not getting a lot of playing time at Alabama, especially as a young person, is not an insult. All right. I mean, that's an all-star team. And you're talking about oh my gosh, you didn't get more playing time than a 1st-round pick. Right. I mean, so it's not an insult. There's nothing to be upset, you know, about when you say, man, it was really hard to crack it at Alabama, because that's what it is. But the question is, can then you come from Alabama and probably have an impact somewhere else? Absolutely. And here's why. How many people on this roster, overall catch, on this Texas roster of starters, how many do you think would be starters at Alabama?
No, it's a fair point. I don't know that Texas has one other than Bijan.
Potentially.
I think that I think Bijan Robinson starts at Alabama right now. No question for me.
Okay.
He's better than what they have right now. But I wouldn't say that about anybody else on the roster.
Yeah, so that's why I don't look at it as any kind of, you know, badge of shame that someone has to wear or Keilan would have to wear to say, well, you didn't really play a lot at Alabama. Well, That's the point. Like, yeah, you may not be able to be at Alabama, but you come to Texas, and you might be able to have a really good impact here in the Big 12 and be able to, have some success here. So, for me, I think it's a great move for him. There's no badge of shame that he has to wear. He could come here and potentially, and have all those years of eligibility because he's, that last year didn't count. Other second thing though, Catch, that it really showed me, and I was curious to see how this whole thing was going to play out. What this really showed me is behind the scenes, Sarkisian has trust from the players who he was with, because there's no way this guy follows Sarkisian down to Texas if he doesn't feel like there's trust. If you go and say, hey, Anwar, I'm starting up another business, somewhere else, and maybe it's outside of Rivals chain or something to that effect. And then I'm like, hey, well, I'm kind of looking for a job. Now, if you say, hey, I want you to come here, I would come with you because we have a relationship. There's trust, right? And I would feel comfortable with that, say, Ketch is my dude. But if he wasn't, and we weren't together anymore, I'm like, man, deuces to you. Like, nah, I ain't never liked that guy to begin with. So what it shows me is that from a relationship building standpoint, he did a really good job of building relationships. First of all, not only with Keilan, with some of his former coaches, Ben Davis, right? It seems to be like he's well liked. It seems like his word means something. Like, because you can't bullshit people and have people follow you along with where you're going to go and possibly reshape their entire life and cities and families and all these other type of things. So what it really shows me a lot about Sarkisian is he's a guy that is an honest person, and it explains maybe that number one recruiting class that he had before, but at USC. But it showed me a lot about his character, that he's having yet again another person say, yeah, I believe in you, I trust you, I'll come down to Texas and I'll play for you.
Yeah, they definitely didn't hate him at Alabama. I'm going to play devil's advocate here a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Could be down to as few as one spot remaining. I feel like we're in an interesting place in the transfer portal because literally Kansas just lost their best player to the portal in the form of a corner this morning. There are still names popping into the portal. Robinson, as evidence of this, literally just days ago. Is this where Texas, we're almost at a point where Texas can't take any more transfers.
Mm-hmm.
Should Texas have more than one spot remaining? Like, I don't know. I guess the question is, was this a bad move from a filling needs standpoint?
No, because if you got a chance to get a playmaker, then you can feel like, all right, I can make it for a few sins. Like, is it could you say, well, it's gluttony on offense? Is it? Let's think about it for a second. I've said this before, as talented as Bijan is and the accolades that he had in high school, and he comes in here as a 5-star, we only still have a 3-game sample size. That's it. We have a 3-game sample size where he didn't get more than 10 carries in a game. So Bijan, we believe he's talented. I'm not knocking him at any stretch of imagination, but you just can't stand on the table and say for sure, this guy's going to give you 1,500. You can't say, I believe he's just as good as Breece Hall is. I believe he's just as good as Kennedy Brooks is. You don't know that for sure. You're anticipating that, but you don't know that. So when you look from an offensive standpoint, we talked about it before, Catch, at the wide receiver position. Who are the killers? Who are the dogs? Who are the people that we say instant playmaker, you can guarantee it? We have some guys that we think might be able to do that, right? We think Troy O'Meara, when healthy, might be able to do that. We think that some of the other receivers may be able to do that, but we don't know. There's not a guy there. The leading receiver, Jordan Whittington, as good as he is, he was injured last year. Jake Smith has been having injuries. Catch the leading receiver or who had the most yards off of last year's team that's returning. And how many yards was that? Again, got to look that up. I don't have it off the top of my head. So you can't even say bona fide, you got receivers as studs. You can't say that, for the tight end position for sure. So at that point, if you have a chance to add in a guy who you think is a playmaker on an offense, that you still have a lot of unproven playmakers, then I say you go for it. And if you're Sarkisian, if you go Star Wars, hell, you're in the Big 12 catch. At that point, you just got to say Oklahoma was winning championships before they ever had a good defense. They just said, screw it, we're just going to outscore you. And if he's got to say, you know what, I don't know what this defense is going to look like. I've tried to add in as many linebackers as possible, try to bring in some DBs. But man, if I need a playmaker out here, and if you just got to go Star Wars with it, so be it.
I don't disagree with you. I would only say what's really interesting about what's unfolded is that Robinson isn't. So Robinson might not be at Texas right now if Maryland hadn't been full. They're at their 25-man number. From when I talked with some Alabama insiders, what they had heard was that Maryland would have been probably the school he would have gone to, because Mike Loxley's the guy that recruited him to Alabama. Mm-hmm. But they didn't have the room. So 25-man number keeps Maryland from potentially being able to get into a player that they otherwise would have wanted to be in on.
If I'm Mike Loxley, though, I go to one of those 25 and I say, hey, man, you sure you want to be here? You sure you want to be here? Let's just have a conversation.
Have you ever heard of a thing called a gray shirt? That's in the office. I'm going to open your world up to the world of gray shirts.
Yes.
It all happened pretty quickly, though, right? And who knows, maybe if this kid goes into the portal in February or March, instead of, he did have to make a quick decision. Presumably he wants to be able to get in like second summer school session and get started with things. If Nate Ote had the USC linebacker had committed to Texas, and or a Caleb Evans showed up on June 1st and been like, I want to be here, and or there have been so many names now, I've somewhat lost track of the names that Texas hasn't gotten, right? There was another DB that they didn't get because of coach connections, whose name I'm already forgetting because I can't remember yesterday, let alone all the transfer portal names that have been in the window. But my point is, only through a little bit of luck is Robinson showing up this weekend and an available spot there for him. So what we've learned a little bit is that I think my early contention that Texas may have been taking a couple of portal names, maybe one or two too many linebackers. Like, I think a case can be made that there's a world where Texas wouldn't have had room yesterday to take a kid like this. And there might still be a world where another player or two enters the portal between now and August that Texas won't have room for. And I don't know, like, it's a little bit of Monday morning quarterbacking, side street driving. I get it. But when we have the conversations like the ones that we've had about Ray Thornton and Ben Davis and some of the decisions that have been made in the transfer portal, I think that those of us who thought, I don't know if that's the guy to take then and there, had situations like this in mind about the portal from the very beginning. I'm the guy that has always been like, Texas needs to be super aggressive. They need to aim big. They need to think big. And I think this is a big thinking kind of move.
Yeah, but
I wonder if there's another name or two when it's all, because we know that they'd like to get a DB. And, at some point they may run out of room to get that guy if they want to get him, or who knows, somebody else from Alabama could enter the portal. Trey Sanders, a 5-star running back. I don't know. I'm just throwing a name out there, but like, you'd like to have versatility when you can have versatility. We've reached the point where the rubber's meeting the road with what Texas can do from a 25-man number in this recruiting class. There may be one spot left, maybe two if you start. I don't know how you do it, but maybe you talk to a guy about a gray shirt or something like that. But these dudes are now all already on campus, so it'd be really hard now to present the gray shirt option to anybody in that last recruiting class. So whatever happens from here on out, Texas is now extremely limited in what they can do. And that may not be a bad thing, because maybe nobody else even comes into the portal. And like, this is the last guy. But this being the first year of the portal, I'd rather end up with one late and have one late than to have none. I'm just curious. We'll see. We'll see what the rest of June looks like. But now we've just reached the point where I think what Texas can do from people have been drooling over an offensive lineman for some time now. If that ideal guy comes into the portal in 2 weeks, they may be SOL a little bit.
Yeah. The hard part is you just don't know.
Yeah.
Here's the realness catch of the transfer portal that doesn't get glorified and we don't talk about it enough. The majority of guys in the transfer portal aren't really that great. I mean, the majority of guys who go in, very few of them are upgrading. Catch very few. We've seen it since the transfer portal has come, and we've seen how many kids have left Texas. Very few did you feel like they were at a big program and they upgraded. Most of them have to go to usually a lower level. That's just how it's. Shane Buechele is a perfect example. I mean, he was a starter here at Texas. He had to go to SMU. Now he went on.
There's about 100 kids where that's not the case.
Yeah, but there's thousands of kids in the portal.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the thing. So you're talking about a really small percentage. So when we focus in on the top echelon of guys. So what I'm saying is you can wait until August to see if something mysteriously falls your way, but more than likely the majority of people who are coming in aren't guys you really even want on your team.
Yeah, but I would have said this exact thing 2 weeks ago if Nate Ote if Ohio State thing, the trickle down thing on that is Alabama gets a linebacker commit. Suddenly Ohio State needs one. And then a guy that Texas thought they had their grips on ends up not being as interested because he's got a better option. No offense to anybody who doesn't think that Texas is a worse option than Ohio State. They're not on the same level at this point. If Nate Ote commits, I would have said then, oh, man, you hate to not have an available scholarship at this point because something could pop into the transfer. We don't know. And so the exact thing you said, we don't know. This is the first year of the portal in this capacity. I mean, there could be like a whole run of portal guys in July that we just don't know about. We've never seen it. Like who knows? And it could be there won't be any, but there could be. And I'm just saying that in this year where Texas went into the process with 8 or 9 spots available to bring in transfer candidates, I think from a planning standpoint, if it was me, I'd like to still be able to be sitting on one or two and hoping to have that versatility, but that's probably discussion in an ideal world. And ask Mike Loxley if it's an ideal world. I mean, sometimes you think you got to have a badass recruiting class with 25 guys in it. And you're like, I didn't even know this transfer portal thing was going to be like this.
Listen, Catch, it's like going out, you're going out to the club, right? And you talk to someone, you're talking to, a nice young lady, and it's 11:15, and she's like, hey, I'm ready. You want to go back to your place and have some drinks. Now you can say, you know what, I can hang around until 1 o'clock in the morning and see, and maybe at 1:15 in the morning, Catch, Megan Good would have walked in and be like, you know what, where's a reporter that's here? I just always wanted to be with a reporter, a 6'2" reporter who's got bald head. Like, is he around? Because that is what I want to do tonight. But I'm already gone because it was 11:15 and I had to take, so it's that gamble, right? And and so at that point,
sometimes those 10:45s, those are like sometimes the 10:45s you don't take around your friends.
Sometimes.
But you're right. Sometimes you pass on the 10:45s. And you just go home at 2 o'clock with with scholarship in hand,
Exactly. So you can gamble, and so now you're like, man.
Look, I am nitpicking to a very high degree here. And if Steve Sarkisian jumped into this Zoom call, I would full on mea culpa and say, look, I have a healthy amount of respect for how long are you supposed to wait to say yes before you take that chance that you've just left an empty hole that some sort of improvement can't be made to your roster. I'm just saying in an ideal world, I think Steve Sarkisian having one or two spots left in the portal, because like this dude that just came into the portal from Kansas, like I have no idea whether or not he would have an interest in Texas or not, but he was their best player last year. True freshman All-American. So he fits the kind of profile that they've been targeting, right? A guy that can come in and give immediate depth at cornerback and be a long, they've gone after a couple of those guys. And
they've lost on some of them, a lot of them too, Catch.
Yes.
So I mean.
And if it meant that in August I had 24 guys in this class instead of 25, I think I would still hold out for my Moby Dick. I think I'm holding one out there, one, in the hopes that an all Big 12 level game changer makes himself available and everybody else is sitting at 25 full, unable to go in on this guy like they. I think I would take that chance, but my criticism or my nitpick has nothing to do with Robinson. In this world where Texas is taking 8 or 9 guys, he's in my pool of 8 or 9. He is among all the guys they've taken in my top 2 or 3 of the portal guys they've taken. I love the addition. I just think if it were me, I would hope to have a little more. I would have broken those numbers down differently than Texas did. I guess ultimately that's what I'm saying.
So let me ask you this. Now that he's here, right? You and I have kicked around from a win total perspective. I think you and I are kind of like in the 9-ish range for Texas this upcoming season. Does this make a difference for you in any stretch? Does it push them to 10? Does it push them in the Big 12 championship game for you?
I don't think anything that's happened in the transfer portal changes the record on this team this year.
Okay. So even though he has big playability,
I think he makes the team better. But do I think that, Keilan Robinson shows up and changes the outcome of the games that I think Texas is like? I don't think he changes Oklahoma. I don't think when Texas goes on the road at Iowa State in what might be the biggest home game in the careers of 22 starting Cyclones who are seniors, like, I don't know that he changes that game. And I don't know that I've seen anybody in this portal class change the outcome of games. When we talk about that athletic top 50 list, Texas didn't have get any of the players on that list. I mean, those are the type of, there is a next 50 on the athletic top 50 ranking of guys that have been in the portal. And I think Texas has done well in the next 50. I think they'd probably have 3 or 4 guys in the next 50. But in the top 50, Texas hasn't been able to get their hands on any of them. Baylor did. West Virginia has. Oklahoma's got 3 or 4. It just hasn't worked out where Texas has really been able to get the big fish. And I think Texas fans, some of them are frustrated. And the thing is, I don't know whether they have a right to be frustrated or not for all the reasons that you and I've talked about over the last couple of weeks of these shows, which is I'm not the one trying to contact one of these impact guys and saying, I'm from Texas. I don't know how that's registering right now for the biggest of the big names, but it's not registering very hard because a guy like Nate Ote was into Texas until the very idea of an improvement kicked in, and then he was ghost. So when we go back to the Ben Davis and some of these, the Ray Thornton conversations and some of the players that they've taken that I wonder about, I don't know who you replace them with. That ultimately is the thing that at the end of this conversation that you and I have, I'm nitpicking, but I don't have answers for, okay, Big Mouth, take a couple of guys away. Who do we get? I don't know.
That's the hard part about that. Okay, so I've overreacted to that. Do we got other overreactions?
From a recruiting standpoint, I think Texas couldn't have picked a worse thing. Like, barrels have got to go. That's my overreaction. A lot of people will be watching this video and they will know what I'm talking about. Texas football had their players and recruits and their coaches take photos this weekend in front of a neon sign that said all gas, no brakes, which was cool, right? Like, I'm down with the flashy, glowing signs. They look great on camera. But they surrounded them with like these old Western themed barrels. It's kind of a discussion on social media. It made its way to Orange Bloods. I just think it's not. I think you want your photo shoots to look like 21-21 and not 18-21. You feel me?
It's interesting. All gas, no brakes, and yeah, it was like wine barrels or bourbon barrels or water. I don't know.
It makes me think of Back to the Future when Marty goes back to the Wild West. But he's got like his sneakers on and he's got his gear from, like, I don't know. I hit his 1980s clothes on in the Wild Wild West. I'm just saying, learn and live. Not a big deal, but you got like weeks and weeks of future visits to go. Maybe ditch the barrels. That's my overreaction. I'm not calling out anybody. I'm not saying that it's the biggest deal in the world. I'm just saying, maybe don't do barrels on social media this weekend. And
can I give you one thing too, by the way?
Maybe you stop me from having a big old hot take that could get me in trouble.
So, yeah. So how about this? While we've been doing this and recording this, Nick Saban received a contract extension through the 2028 season.
It's all recruiting, baby.
Yeah, I mean, so he will have a base of 8.4, which will increase annually.
He ain't ever going to see the end of that contract. But what that's about is his recruiting never being interrupted by someone saying that he's 70 whatever years old and he only has a few years on his contract. And so, if you pick him, he won't be there for your senior year. This just puts all that, I think there's a better chance that Nick Saban leaves in the next 3 or 4 years than there is that he stays for another 8. But Alabama's very wise to put themselves into a position where they just never get dinged in recruiting over something like over an optics thing. And so they just solved any question of there ever being an optical issue. And when your coach gets into his 70s, like, that's something you got to do.
Oh, yeah.
So,
oh, yeah.
I just think it was really smart. I think that was all about recruiting. And it shouldn't be a surprise that Alabama, if it's recruiting related, would be on top of that.
Yeah, by the way, Tuscaloosa News, they threw me off a little bit. They, in their headline, they say he's got an extension through 2028 season, but in the first graph, they say it's 2029. So I'll just have to go back and I'm going to assume, the people who write the headlines aren't always the people who write the stories. So it may be through 2029, Ketch, actually, as opposed to 2028, which pretty much says that Nick Saban could do essentially what Bobby Bowden used to do when he was at Florida State, which is stand on the sidelines and let all these other coaches coach and literally just be the guy that does recruiting. And that's what Bobby did in the later years. He'd let everybody else handle it. And it's interesting. So it's interesting from a recruiting perspective, especially when we're talking about recruiting. It's fascinating that he will just go down. Be there as long as he wants to, just as long as he wants to.
You want my hot take on a Monday?
Yes.
this Texas recruiting weekend that Texas just had, which by all accounts from everybody who was there, very successful. Everybody left. Texas is going to get some commitments out of it, almost certainly. People had good times. Texas got to do better, do more. It's not good enough. That's my hot take. At the end of the day, I can't tell people that 5 stars and 4-star prospects matter more than anything else in the world in recruiting, and then pretend that I didn't just say that on a weekend where Texas only had one player in the Rivals 100 on campus and none from the 24/7 composite 100. So those are and Texas will, like this upcoming weekend, Texas is going to have difference makers on campus. The weekend after that, Texas is going to have difference makers on campus. But if people wanted to watch today's video and hear some thoughts on the recruiting weekend that was, well, we got all week to do videos. I would say, though, about the recruiting weekend, there are bigger fish to fry. No offense. Like I just wrote a column over at orangebloods.com, my 10 thoughts from the weekend, where I outline there are 9 uncommitted super war daddies in the state of Texas. Texas is realistically, I think, in it for 6 of them. If that's the case, they got to get almost all 6 of those if we're really going to be talking about a top 5 level class in 2022. And none of those kids were on campus this weekend. So I don't want to do that thing where Texas gets a huge commitment. And it's like, well, what do you mean by huge? Oh, he's a high 3-star? Well, if he's huge, what's bigger than huge, right? So what I didn't want to do is give into hyperbole this weekend on the recruiting front and act like some sort of seismic shift occurred when it hasn't yet. And we will define how Texas does in recruiting this season on about 10 things other than what happened this weekend.
Wow. Okay. I mean, on that one, I defer to you. I mean, you have your Lone Star recruiting that came out this weekend, and I read your column, and okay. So let me just ask you this: of the 9 guys that you feel like are war daddies, and your definition of a war daddy is a high 4-star, 5-star prospect. Is that what you're essentially saying?
They are mathematically 2 times, 3 times, 4 times as likely to be drafted at all versus any of the other prospects that would be available. And in some cases, if we're talking about the first round, they're 10 to 25 times more likely to emerge as first-round draft picks versus the players that don't fall into those tiers.
Okay, so let me do me a favor. Get the names up for me. The guys that you want to talk about. So for those who didn't see it, I want to make sure we get the names of those 9 guys that you're talking about. Let me know that you're ready, because as you do that, then I also want to know realistically, what are the guys you think realistically could come to Texas? Who are the guys you think realistically could come to Texas? And of that number, how many do they really need to get? Do they need to get 3 of them? Do they need to get 4 of them? So I just want to give you the setup so maybe you can take us a little deeper.
So understand that Texas currently has maybe 2 national top 100 type prospects. They've got Malik Murphy, who's the highest rated prospect in the Texas recruiting class as things currently stand. Before this re-rankings, which Rivals is releasing this week, he's number 61 or something like that in the country. And then you've got Jaden Blue. But beyond that, in this class so far, there are not a lot of you need to get a top 5 class. You almost have to have 10 difference makers ish. Okay. So I got Texas with 2, and they got a couple of guys who are like just outside of that territory, but outside is outside. I think there are 9 guys. Let's start with the 3 guys that Texas probably isn't going to be involved in. You've got Harold Perkins, who's a linebacker from Cypress Park, easily the best linebacker in the state of Texas. That's a position that doesn't always cultivate towards big-time success at the collegiate and NFL data points at that position, but he's by far and away the best guy this year. He's likely going to A&M. He was at A&M this weekend. I've got him future casted to A&M. It would be a surprise if he doesn't go to A&M. You've got a defensive end out of Duncanville named Omari Obor, who is the best defensive end in the state by miles. He was at Ohio State this weekend. He's not visiting Texas. Matter of fact, when you consider that Omari Obor and Bear Alexander are both 2 5-star level defensive linemen, and neither are likely to take an official visit to Texas at this point, that's an L, whichever way that works. It's an L. If you're Texas, you've got to get those 2 guys on campus somehow, some way. At this point, probably not. And then you've got Cam Dewberry, who's one of 3 5-star offensive linemen from the state of Texas in this class. There are 3, Anwar, 3. Dewberry is the guy who's least likely to come to Texas. He had Texas as in his top 5, but as the number 5 school prior to visiting LSU this weekend on an official visit, or actually it may have been an unofficial visit. He was there for a couple of days. He did all the photos. He left saying that LSU is definitely in his top 5. If LSU is definitely in the top 5, then Texas is definitely no longer in it. If they were number 5 prior to LSU getting into the top 5, something had to give. Maybe it's not Texas, but at best, Texas is hovering at the back end of his top 5 and not towards the top of that list. At worst, again, another guy they may not be able to get in for a visit, although he's scheduled and planned to come in for a visit, an unofficial visit later this month. Okay, so now that leaves 6 guys. Wide receiver Evan Stewart, who was once committed to Texas and is still seriously considering them. 2 other 5-star offensive linemen in Devin Campbell and Kelvin Banks. Then you've got Denver Harris, who's the number 9 player or number 8 player in the country in the Rivals 5-star rankings released today. You've got Bryce Anderson, a DB from Beaumont Westbrook, who visited A&M over the weekend. And you've got Brennan Thompson, an athlete from Spearman. So you've got a wide receiver, really 2 wide receivers, Evan Stewart and Brennan Thompson. 2 wide receivers, 2 offensive linemen, and 2 DBs. And that's just kind of how it works out right now, because they're not in on the defensive end, defensive tackle, and linebacker. So we're back in this spot where Texas isn't getting big looks from the most important front 7 guys on defense. And, you know, on the offensive side of the ball, most of the key talent that they're looking at in state is wide receiver and offensive line. That's where they're best served to have the best remaining impact players. They've got to get at least 5 of those guys. I think Vegas would set the line at 5.5. I think they've got to sweep that entire board of names that I just said: Stewart, Campbell, Banks, Harris, Anderson, Thompson. They need to sweep the board. I think Vegas would probably put that number at 5.5. I'll say they get 5 of those 6 right now. But I think in order to get a top 5 class, given that they aren't sitting in on a lot of big-time out-of-state prospects of this ilk, they're going to have to do their damage in state to pull off the kind of recruiting class that I think expectations have been set towards. And that means you cannot take very many losses, not even 2. If Texas took 2 L's in the 6 names that I just mentioned, I think that's a disappointing recruiting class when we get to December and February.
And here's the thing, the tough part too, Ketch, as you're talking about, is how do you reel a guy like Evan Stewart back in? I mean, Evan Stewart was committed to Texas, and then he decided that he wasn't going to be committed to Texas. And then we saw pictures of him at the University of Florida, you know, this weekend, enjoying himself, living his best life, right? And so it's pretty rare, Ketch, that a kid commits, decommits, and then comes back to the same school, right? I mean, like, how often does that happen? Because I don't think that's something I've seen too often.
It doesn't happen very often. I suppose if you're Texas, the good news is it's Texas, Florida, and Alabama in the top 3 per Evan Stewart's own words last night in an interview that he did with a Florida website in the Rivals Network. I suppose the bad news is it's Texas, Florida, and Alabama.
Yeah.
And Alabama.
Emphasis on Alabama.
Yeah. Alabama really wants that kid. And, I think that's a battle that Texas couldn't win with the Brockermeyer twins. It's a battle that until Texas really does it, I think has to favor Alabama. And I'll be completely honest. When I closed my eyes and thought of those 6 names and the 5.5 number, Evan Stewart's the guy that for all the reasons that you've outlined and the fact that there aren't many Texas versus Alabama battles that we're talking about. If there's another one, Texas to get Denver Harris, the number 9 or number 8 player in the country, maybe the best, we're splitting hairs when we talk about someone like him and Jeffrey Okudah. But when we're talking about best cornerbacks that come out of the state of Texas in the last 10 years, Denver Harris is in that category, that type of echelon. He canceled his visit to Texas A&M this weekend. It's going to be a Texas-Alabama battle for that kid. And I that's a kid that I have Texas future casted towards. But before it's all said and done, before that kid commits, he's going to have to go to Alabama, and he's going to have to come home and make a mental decision that he's choosing Texas over Alabama in a head-to-head decision. And that has not been a head-to-head battle that has been kind to Texas in the last few years.
Yeah. And, it was interesting. I was listening to Andy Staples' podcast over the weekend as I was cutting my grass, right? Shout out to Andy Staples. And, I don't want to butcher it. So, but essentially they talked about the top recruiting programs in the country, like the Alabamas, Ohio State. And they gave this stat, Catch, like, I don't know, it was like 50, 60%, something like that, of the elite guys, probably like your top 100 guys, go to like 4 or 5 schools.
Yeah.
I mean, it's whatever that number is, it's crazy that the majority of those guys are going to a certain, Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, and everybody else is just kind of left, trying to pick up the scraps at that point. So it's interesting as Texas is fighting for this. This is kind of like the first battle for Sarkisian that other coaches have had, whether Charlie Strong has had it, Tom Herman's had it, Sarkisian has had it, where it's now, okay, you're battling against the top guys and you may end up with a top 5 class. We've seen it happen, at least with Tom Herman, I think 2 straight years. But you're going to have to battle perception, and you're going to have to battle the reality that these other programs are pitching towards guys. And we've seen guys who have been in Texas's backyard. We've seen Garrett Wilson be only a few miles from the Texas campus and still say, now I'm going to go up to Ohio State. Now, some people say, well, he still had family there, so on and so forth. But he had family here in Texas also, right? I mean, he wasn't living by himself in a tent. So clearly he had family in Austin as well. And he, so that, you can't say that. So, it'll be very interesting to see in these battles how the, Sarkisian, if they can win them, win the battles that, by the way, when they were at Alabama, they were winning. Those were the battles that they were able to come in and say they're winning. Now, all of a sudden, they've got to combat the things that they would say against Texas. Now they've got to find a way to combat that to bring in these guys.
It's a little bit like in 8 Mile when Eminem's taking on Papa Doc, and Eminem gets to go first.
Yeah.
And say all of the things that Papa Doc's going to say to him. But that movie ends differently because Papa Doc won the coin toss, right?
Yes.
He won if he goes first, 8 Mile ends with Eminem walking home with his tail between his legs.
Absolutely. He probably throws up again.
Yes. That spaghetti like all over his clothes. Instead, Eminem gets to go first, and he, there's a little bit of that. Like Texas is in this situation where they've got assistant coaches, like you said, who have used the recruitment speech that they're now fighting against. They've used it themselves. And so the difference is they don't probably, the problem that Texas has in recruiting that I don't think enough Texas fans truly understand and appreciate is that when Texas is, let's just say Texas is in a recruiting battle with LSU, A&M, Ohio State, and Alabama. Three of those four schools are in the SEC. And while they may beat up each other, they're all selling that conference. They are all selling, we're real football. And why are you even looking at these other schools and these other conferences? When it's one school you're competing against that does that, you can kind of compete against that. When 60 to 80% of the schools that you are visiting are hammering that nail over and over and over, it creates a bit of like an inferiority complex that kids get when they think about going to Texas. The one thing they're hearing from everybody is, well, you don't want to go there for this reason. And you want to come here. So like if you're at A&M, the thing they don't have to worry about in a recruiting battle against LSU, against Georgia, against Alabama, they don't have to worry about all of those schools negatively recruiting their presence in what they're selling as an inferior league. And suddenly what Texas's coaches have to do is they got to go from being in that Papa Doc spot to being in the M&M spot, but they don't get to keep Papa Doc from going second. They've got to make their pitch after Papa Doc has said all that stuff about, Eminem's girl getting taken from him and getting beat up and pistol whipped. All that stuff gets out. And they've got to figure out how to win that rap battle against that. And it's not easy. And I don't think Texas fans have a clear enough appreciation for the fact that all of these years have gone by, and as Texas has been in its funk, the SEC has been on the ascent in this historical climb of dominance, and Texas has to fight against that. And what we're going to find out about Sarkisian and this staff pretty quickly, I think, over the summer, is how many of those guys can Texas get to say yes? Because Texas hired a guy they thought could do that. But if it proves to be harder than we thought, I think this entire rebuild takes more time than Texas fans. I got a question today about Texas in the 2021 playoffs.
I saw that.
And Texas isn't there. I don't know what world are you living in where that word is in your brain right now? Because the baby steps that Texas needs to take involve something pre-playoff. As Anwar says, how many 5 stars do you need to beat the likes of Oklahoma and TCU and Iowa State consistently? Texas isn't even there yet, let alone beating and dethroning Oklahoma in a way that puts them in the presence of Ohio State and Clemson and Alabama on a regular basis. So I don't know. There's a reality that exists that I don't think Texas fans, a lot of them, are glued into that matrix, but they may be in a couple of months if those 6 names that I mentioned don't all come to Texas en masse, because I think Texas fans are going to realize this isn't an elite of the elite recruiting class before December. They will. They'll see the names go off the board, and they'll be able to see, just like kind of with Herman a year ago, like, oh, they're gone. They're gone. And I'm fascinated to see how it unfolds, because I've been betting that Sark and his coaching staff will get it done. But it is no slam dunk, and the path to getting there is filled with some, obstacles to climb over that won't be easy. Look, Anwar and I have been talking for a long time. Anwar, I'll wrap this bad boy up. Do you have anything else on this Overreaction Monday show?
No, the only thing I'll say in 15 seconds or less is the one thing I did glean also from the Andy Stales podcast is that they predicted that a lot of these classes are going to get filled up, probably by the end of June. So Texas, these kids have been sitting around, haven't been able to make visits. They're finally able to get on campus. They've been able to do a lot of research right now and previously. So the window of opportunity to strike is now for Texas and Sarkisian. That's all.
Like the video if we've entertained you for the last hour, and maybe subscribe to the channel. We're creeping up.
Subscribe. Don't maybe subscribe. Do it.
Man. Help us. We are close to 2,000 subscribers. When we get to 2,000, Anwar's going to put a clown wig and no. That's me after like 5,000 whenever Ray Thornton gets his 5 sacks.
I'm going to get people the subscription to my OnlyFans page, and we'll see it up. Not just joking.
Oh, man. It's early, too. Anwar hasn't – I don't even think Anwar's – it's not even drink 30 yet.
No, still water.
Still water. Just so that everybody knows we're same page with the beverage of choice. Look, for myself and Anwar Richardson, don't take any photos in front of barrels. I'm just kidding. Take all the photos in front of barrels you want to. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Later.